Okay, so SOTI, you have recently produced a report, and I'll read this one out because it's quite a long title: Reduce, Reuse, Rethink, from Discard Mentality to Tech Sustainability. And I think the sort of headline finding or suggestion in the report is that we need, or the business needs to look at the way it manages its IT devices. I think mainly because that a lot of organizations are, if you like, retiring or disposing of these devices when they're still perfectly useful. So in other words, they're wasting potential use of those devices. Is that right?
Yeah, that's definitely correct, spot on. I would say it's the report kind of talks about how companies are using IT, for how long they're using it. Are they getting new devices earlier than they actually need? And how are they taking care of the products they have been using when they have no use for them anymore? So that's kind of the core essence of what this report talks about, and the changes in the market that is being seen around this green IT that's coming more and more being spoken about, and being part of a lot of companies' profiles going forward, so to say.
Yeah, and does the report tell us, or anecdotally, did you happen to know, in terms of how big the problem of e-waste is? I mean, do you have any numbers around what goes to landfill? I mean, I know there is an increased amount of recycling, so company A might get rid of its devices, but then they'll, somebody might repurpose it, a channel company might repurpose them, and somebody else uses them. So what's the sort of landscape look like in terms of waste and recycling at the moment?
Yeah, it's a big issue. And if you just look at like last year, what was generated in e-waste was about a record 57.4 million tons. So we're talking really, really big numbers here. So it is definitely a big issue that we have. And also, if you look at like, what do people think about this? Like, what are we aware about? Like in companies, as employees, we think like, well, we probably take care about this much better than what we actually do. So 50% of all companies, employees, they think that we actually take care of our e-waste, while actual numbers are around 17%. So it's a big gap there as well, what the perception is and what we're actually doing. So it's a big gap on that. That probably has also to do how we ourselves in our normal lives at home, how we recycle things and do things on our own versus how corporations are doing it as well. So there's probably a gap there, and that's why people think as they are around the e-waste.
Okay, and does the report sort of examine or give any suggestions as to how you can sort of address this situation where the sort of automatically replacing kit every, whether it's on a date basis or when a new release comes out, whatever it is, are there any sort of suggestions as to how you can address the situation?
Yeah, the report definitely talk about those kind of areas, what you can do to reduce this. It's definitely a change in the mindset. It does start, I would say, when you look into when do I need to buy more hardware, and and then also think about what I'm actually buying. What is the lifespan of the things I am buying as new? Is it going to be a 1 year lifespan, 2 years, 5 years? What is it that the hardware is actually going to have? But also the things that I actually have, how can I extend that lifespan? What tools do I have to make sure I'm just replacing the things that actually needs to be replaced versus just taking a batch of things that I have and replace them all and hope I catch everything that actually needs to be replaced. So being more cautious about that and replacing the things that I have to replace. And there are tools for that available, and how you can actually identify when and what to replace. So, and also help you extend, taking it maybe from 1 year to 2 years or 2 years to 3, so like extending the additional time that you can use the things that you already have. And I think that's also a key. If you look at the market today, you have the chip shortage as well out there. So getting that new hardware is also not that easy. So you're kind of forced into the position of thinking green, because even if you want to have the additional devices, the new devices, there's a big backlog, or they can't actually, you can't get hold of them. So you have to be more careful using and utilizing what you have in a better way as well.
Okay, but I guess it's slightly sort of set against that, everyone's sort of rushing towards digital transformation. And I guess the vendors in particular maybe are trying to convince everyone that, you know, unless you've got the latest, fastest server or, you know, storage device, you're going to be, you know, suffering compared to your, you know, other people in your industry, whatever. So I suppose, how do we balance that, you know, the suggestion, whether it's, you know, actually required or not, that you need to have the latest, greatest devices, and what you're saying, obviously, that the fact that companies should be potentially looking at holding on to, you know, technology they have for a little bit longer?
It's definitely a balancing act of how to do this. But having something in the background, like a system that can actually understand what's going on what is the state of what you have, so you can do a good evaluation of how much I need to add and how much I can more use what I have, will help you to kind of do this balancing act. But yes, you won't get fully away from, like, I maybe have to acquire more things to be able to do the expand that I need to do, but then think about how I do it. So I'm doing it according smart and according to the green IT kind of concept. So I'm more cautious about actually acquiring things that will have a long lifespan as well. Yeah, so that's also a key in the balancing act for us going forward, to have that mindset. But it is definitely a balancing act. It isn't easy, but having the foundation of the knowledge is definitely a key here.
Okay, yeah. So I guess companies, when you say companies aren't going to deliberately sort of, you know, cause themselves, you know, competitive disadvantage by holding on to, you know, failed technology. But I'm also wondering, employees, I mean, every time, dare I say, you know, company X or Y produces a new, you know, mobile phone, or, you know, whatever it happens to be, you know, everyone thinks, oh, I must get the latest and greatest. So is there any pressure on companies, you know, from their employees, or do they need to, again, educate them that they don't necessarily need the latest shiny, you know, device every year that it comes, you know, is updated? Yeah. So how does that sort of friction work as well?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I come from kind of the group of people that has been growing up with internet coming into the play, all these big technology advantages. So I always kind of grown up with, like, I need to have, because every new model, there's such a big advantage gain in the next model. It's like it's massive, big change for every step that's been taken. But if you look now, what's happening, if you compare with, as an example, you can say the latest iPhone as an example, which was very recently released. If you compare that to the previous version, you couldn't really separate them unless you actually go in and read the specifications very, very carefully. And if someone holds them up besides, you probably might not even be able to guess which one is the new and which one is the previous one. So the gains are not currently as big between the models as well as it has previously been. But also it's the mindset of the different people, like the people that are coming into companies now. They are growing up with the knowledge of the environment much more than when I was in school and coming into companies and starting working. Like, that mindset didn't really exist in the same way. It was always focused on the technology, the latest and the greatest, the innovation, versus now the mindset is more aware of green IT and the environment. So that's, you also need to nurture towards that when you're thinking of your profiling towards, like, because the people you're hiring now, they come from that kind of group of people that has a different mindset from previous employees that you've been hiring, because they were in the older generation, not really old, but like, you know, similar to myself, so to say. We were always very focused on having the latest and greatest. So it has changed, and it will keep changing over time, that shifting the mindset from always having the latest and greatest to be more aware and cautious about environment. So that needs to be there, yeah, in the thought process when we're talking about why it's key to always have the greatest and latest. Is it always going to be so going forward, so to say? I don't think so.
Yeah, and do you think vendors as well? I mean, clearly they do have a responsibility, but do you think they will increasingly step up to? I know, you know, some of the hardware manufacturers offer sort of recycling, refurbishment programs, but dare I say, I won't say they're maybe token, but they're clearly not pushing them, you know, over and above selling, you know, vast amounts of new tin. Do you think at some stage they will have to understand that, you know, their profitability cannot rely on selling, you know, vast amounts, as you say, of a slightly tweaked, you know, new model every year? They'll have to understand that their sales cycles might, you know, last a bit longer and slightly re-engineer, you know, where their profits come from.
Around the hardware for the the partners and the manufacturers, there's definitely more things that can be done around the services. It doesn't just have to be the hardware. Like, if you think about when you're buying a car, you don't buy that for normally 2 years or so. You buy for a long period of time because you know that you're going to have that for a long time. And there's a big service plan, and there's a lot of additional services you get around it. The same goes within this technology, where around the mobility, there's much more that can be done with services around. So, for example, you mentioned refurbishing hardware. Like, okay, so we know the first thing that will suffer in a mobile device will be the battery. So being able to replace the battery will be key, as an example. So if you're not able to replace the battery yourself with a service that can do that for you, having the battery replaced will definitely expand the life cycle of that device. So thinking about that type of services, you have the screens and all the other stuff as well. So there's definitely more that can be done there, but also in conjunction with the software, because we know when we first buy a device, it's super fast, it's excellent, a lot of storage. As time go, we fill it up with a lot of applications, photos, other stuff, and it starts to get slower and slower and slower. So also having something that can actually handle that and remove the things that we don't need, kind of cleaning it out, so to say, on the software side will also help. So it's a combination of like services and software that can help hardware manufacturers to kind of, not always have to fully replace the devices as often, but so there are more services and things to do around the hardware itself, so to say.
And you say on the software side, again, I guess it's a two-way thing, because again, all the vendors issue endless updates, and I mean, some of them are clearly important and others are little tweaks. And then at some point they decide that they're no longer going to support certain, you know, versions and all the rest of it. So there's that side of it. And I guess the users as well. I mean, if you've got a decent IT department, I guess they are implementing all the patches and all the updates, but maybe in a lot of companies that's not happening. So as you say, keeping the software up to date, both from, well, I say from the end user perspective is important, but from the vendor point of view, they maybe need to issue less releases, but when they are, they're perhaps a bit more important. Does any of that make sense?
Yeah. It's also a combination with that, with the security risks as well. Like there's a reason why these updates are being made. It's not just to kind of upgrade your device to the point where you have to replace the hardware to a new one, it's of course to make sure you're getting the latest and greatest security enhancements on these devices to kind of, we know we need to keep up because there are always new hacks and security breaches and things like this. So not maintaining the software is definitely key. And that's something we've started to see a lot of the hardware manufacturers to think about having those longer term programs where they guarantee software updates and upgrades for a certain amount of time. So that's being key in their setup, in their packaging, where that didn't really exist before. You didn't really need it because you use your device, and then kind of replace it after a few years, and that's it. But now it's more key of making sure when you're buying the hardware, there is, it's going to be possible to use this device. It's going to receive all the necessary updates and security patches that's required. Otherwise, that could be an issue for you as a company for breaches and other things out there. And we know the mobility and the devices are a point of entry, so to say, for an organization. So it's key to have that patched and update.
And in more general terms, you've alluded to a couple of times, I think, in terms of the sort of generations, but do you think, I mean, it's not just the IT world, it's more generally the sort of age of the consumer we're in, where everyone expects everything today, and rather than repairs anything, they tend to just, bin it and get something new. But do you think there is a genuine sort of trend now that people are much more aware about sustainability, with all the the COPs going on and governments putting out regulations, the EU, etc., that people can no longer assume that they can just consume whether it's oil and gas or actual products, and so things need to change. I mean, do you think that's really beginning to kick into the business world in a significant way?
It's definitely coming, and we are definitely starting to see a change. So we deal with a lot of like tenders, as they're called, when a company need to acquire a new solution. They need both the hardware and the software. And in these kind of tenders, if you just go back like 2 or 3 years ago, you didn't see any questions that you had to fill in and reply back to in regards to kind of the degree 90, like how is this being taken care of? How does this work, like around everything in regards to environment and e-waste? Now in the tenders that come today, it's more common to see this being part of the actual tender. You have to reply on those kind of topics. So it's definitely in the company's mindset. They have a profile towards this, so they need to make sure whatever new solutions they are acquiring can actually be attached to that profile that they have. So it's becoming more and more present. And you also mentioned the governments are also doing different things, especially like within EU. You see there's a law that's being proposed that you need to be able to replace the batteries yourself without having to kind of ship it to a specific facility to change it. You should be able to change the actual battery in your home kind of setup. And that is, of course, a game changer for a lot of the companies that are creating this kind of hardware out there, that they have to make sure that that is actually possible. And that also then becomes crucial to have what we call smart batteries, so you can have a better understanding of what's actually going on with the batteries you have, because you're going to come to the point where, is this battery that I'm putting into my device at the same capabilities and possibilities as the original battery that it was shipped with, so I don't break any warranties and things like this as well. So if that comes into play, and I think it's 2024, something like that. It's a proposal that will change a lot of things, and smart batteries and all of this will be really key for everyone to have an understanding of. So you definitely see these different types of motions from different areas coming together. So yeah.
And in terms of yourself, SOTI, I think one of the things you do at least is around the device management, and perhaps you can tell us a little bit. I think you've got products like enterprise mobility management and X-Site. So how do those help, and how do you, I guess, more generally as a company, help your customers address the kind of things we've been talking about?
Yeah, so at SOTI we have an enterprise mobility management system, which is kind of the foundation of our platform, and that's the system that really manage the devices, that knows everything that's going on with them, and then where you can do, as we said, all of these types of updates and changes and that you need to do over its lifetime. And then you have SOTI X-Site, which gives you more of a operational insight to what's actually going on with my estate of mobility. How is my batteries being used? Which devices are due to have issues? So I can be more proactive, and I can make the replacements that I need to do. I can make the optimizations I need to do to be as up and running and as foreseeing as I possibly can. So I do the right things, replacing the right devices at need, and I'm helping the user proactively. That's kind of where SOTI X-Site comes into play in conjunction with our mobile control.
Okay, and at the moment, is it, and I'm not sort of denigrating what you're doing, but is it most of your customers are sort of asking for your technology because it obviously makes complete business sense to manage their IT estate, their devices as efficiently as possible? Or are you actually getting people sort of knocking on the door and saying, for not just business reasons but sustainability reasons, we do want to ensure that we're getting the optimum use out of all our devices for as long as we can, increasing the life cycles, etc. Is that conversation you're having, or is it still mainly we want to be as efficient as possible, and if that happens to have a green angle, then even better?
The green angle is definitely something that's coming up more, and you definitely see it. And I think it's a combination of the where we are in currently in the world with the financials that's going on, with the uncertainty and stuff like that, and with the chip shortage that we also briefly talked about. That means that companies need to kind of have something in place to be able to manage this within their own organization. So it's definitely coming up more and more that they need to have this awareness and something to use to be able to actually think about this and manage this, also according to the green IT profile and e-waste, but also because of the situations that are out there, it's going to help them to use what they have much more efficient and in different areas of their organization.
Okay, and maybe just as we finish, I can imagine for a lot of organizations, it is quite early days to be looking at their IT estate in this way. So when they are trying to balance the need for innovation, competitiveness, the whole digital transformation thing, onboarding some new technology, and then we have this sustainability thing. Are there any, I know every customer will be slightly different, but are there one or two pieces of sort of general advice you can give them as to where do they start in a small little way and then build it up gradually over the whole estate? What are the easy wins, I suppose?
I mean, I would say easy wins for any corporation would be to not just acquire new technology and hardware, but to have from out of the box to get a system that can help you manage that fleet of devices and technology that you're actually acquiring, because that will be key benefit for you going forward to make the most use of what you're actually acquiring. These devices are quite expensive, and you want to make sure that you're getting a return of what you're acquiring for as long time as possible. So having a system there is definitely one of those aspects. Then getting the insights to, have I now got the most out of this device, and is it time to replace this? To have that knowledge is also key. So you don't buy things unnecessarily, so to say, is another key aspect. And yeah, there are definitely gains of getting these types of platforms to have that level of knowledge, but also then in conjunction with helping your end users, your workers, so to say, because it's not just hand them a device and things will happen by itself. They need to be happy to use those products and understand how to use them. So being able to support your users remotely and at any time, every day, is also key. So buying new hardware and things to kind of expand your business or start up a new part of the business, make sure to have something there to actually manage that from the beginning. That's the kind of the key thing, I would say.
Okay, well, that's great. Stefan, I really appreciate you taking the time out. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
No worries.